All right, we're back, and it is COMP229. That's Advanced Web Application Development here at Centennial in the fall 2016 semester. It's week 4, part 2 of our broadcast, and we're talking about database now. We finished talking about our assignment, our next assignment, which is our project number 1, which you should be working with a partner. One of the questions I had during the break was, what if I don't get a partner, like this guy, right? He needs a partner, right? It's not a laughing matter. It's actually quite difficult sometimes to get a partner, because there's so much to cover, and you have to. Some people might say, well, there's a lot of stuff here, Tom, and I really need a partner because, like you said, you're telling me I need a partner. I don't have a partner. What do I do, right? The answer is start now, right? And the reason why is because I can't take away from your criteria. I can't look at you and go, well, you're working alone, so I'm only give you half the criteria. You still got to build your page, right? Maybe I would, if you were to talk to me and say something like, well, can you cut down on some of the data, the content that I got to put in? Instead of 4 weeks, can I do 2 weeks of content? Okay, if that helps you to cut things down, I would allow that. But it's really for testing purposes, right? That's why the content is there in the first place, right? So what if you can't find a partner? There's people that don't have a partner right now. Put it up there. Put up, requests to partner up with somebody. I think if someone's asking for a partner, typically that's a good thing. That's a good thing that they're asking. It means they want to work, right? Now, some people may be concerned with partners, and I've talked about this at length in different courses. Like, for example, I want to partner with somebody, right? But I don't like anybody. And I don't trust anybody, right? I don't trust anybody because I think they're not gonna work well. I don't want to work with a dog, bark, bark, right? They talk a lot, but they don't do anything. That's what a dog is. Or they promise they're going to deliver and they don't deliver. That's a problem, right? When they say, yeah, I'm going to give you this, A, B, C, but they don't give you anything. That's a bad thing if they don't deliver, right? So, and sometimes people get burned. But the great thing about this project is there's 3 parts. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. So let's say you partner up with somebody. Let's say me and Javid partner up together, right? And then Javid doesn't like me, right? He thinks I don't produce, right? Let's just say. So part 2 comes along and he says, you know what, Tom, I really don't want to work with you anymore, right? You did part 1, marks are done for part 1, has nothing to do with part 2. If Javid wants to continue working on his website, his game tracker on his own, and if you want to take from that game tracker on and work on your own, you have to approach me, let me know that you've split, and now your game tracker is going to be different than the other one. So you have the same start, the concept and everything else is the same, but it's a totally different project, all right? I would allow that. Right? If that happened. Here's the problem. Here's something that I have a lot of questions for, though. Right? What if you don't have a partner in part 1, you do it on your own, and then part 2 you come along and say, I want to partner with this other guy, and he doesn't have a partner, right? It's kind of weird because you already did a concept, and you're going to discard one of them. One of the concepts are going to go out the window, right? So again, you have to come to me and say, I didn't have a partner for part 1. I created a concept. I passed or failed part 1, whatever it is. But I want to combine. I want to work with Javid, let's say as an example, because I think he doesn't have a partner. I didn't have a partner, and I kind of want to work with him. Would you allow that? And as long as you run it by me, and I say yes, you're good to go. Do part 2 together, right? And the same thing with part 3. Now, part 3, I'm going to be extra critical about because that's your final build. So after part 2, I'm going to probably say no more changes, right? Because unless there's some kind of extraneous something happens, I don't know, we get hit by a meteor or something like that, or whatever. There's some kind of bomb threat. Did I say bomb threat? I don't know. Something weird at the school that prevents us from working together. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say those things. Maybe it's a bad thing to say. I apologize. But what I'm saying is that something's got to be, even if it's funny, something's got to be really catastrophic for us to, after part 2, to want to change partners, right? So part 1, work with somebody. If you don't like them, you're not married to them, okay? Unless maybe you are married to them. I don't know. Right? But if you're not married to them, that means you can, if you want to switch, then that means you can stop working with them, and then you've already done part 1, you got your marks for part 1, you can help them build part 2 and part 3, all right? Or whatever, if you really want to. And I would allow that. That's why we have milestones and so on. And by the way, it'll be the same thing when we hit the second half semester, there'll be a bigger project with 4 people, right? And some people have asked me, well, Tom, can I make it 5 people? Sometimes. Or can I make my partners, instead of 2 people working together, can I make it 3 people? Guys, the answer is normally no, right? because these projects that I've created are really scaled for those 2 or 4 people, up to 4, up to 2. Now, if you want to make it up to, if you add another person, so it goes from 2 to 3, that's like 50% more bandwidth, right? More horsepower, if you will, right? So if you can justify what the other person is going to add in, I might accept a third person for this project, part 1, right? Or part 1, part 2, part 3. But chances are, unless you make a really good argument, and I'm pretty good at arguing back, right? The answer is going to be no. Only because it's not that big. This is a game tracker. It's like 2 people can get together and get this thing done. Sometimes the third party is like too many chefs making the stew, right? It's just going to end up stinking, right? So please don't do that. Work together with 2 people, get her done, start early, submit often, and then remember that next week on Friday is your concept that I'll be looking at one Wednesday. Let me tell you that again. I'll be looking at it on Wednesday, which means there's probably going to be a lab next week on Wednesday, which is worth 2% of your final mark, right? That I'm going to check to see if you've got it started. It's due Friday, but I'm going to check it Wednesday, right? Hint, hint. All right. So don't let it go. Don't let me catch you without starting it on Wednesday, right? And I mean, I want to see it started. I want to see wireframes. That's what I'm going to be looking at for Wednesday, okay? So be aware of that I'm going to be looking for wireframes for Wednesday. Only wireframes at the very minimum to give a 2% mark. I know, she's like, okay, enough, Tom. You've said it a couple times. Continue now. Let me show me some real stuff. I know, I want to go to the next level, but the problem is people don't listen, right? So that's why I'm repeating myself again and again. So hopefully you'll be ready and there won't be a lot of X's and more checks, right? Okay. I got this project and I want to add stuff to it, but we have a problem. I don't have a database, right? There's a couple ways to create a database. One way is through Azure, right? Now, if you want to get the bonus, and if you're good with Azure, then here's the way to do it. I'm going to go to my Azure portal, portal.azure.com. I'm going to log in as me, right? I'm going to log in as me. One day. There we go. Okay, I'm logged in as me. Now you can see this little symbol and added help and support, added billing to favorites, monitor. All these things got changed. Okay, cool. I want to create a new SQL database. Here it is. You can do this with a Microsoft Imagine account. You can create up to 3 or 4 databases. Let's create one. So here's my SQL database. Remember that a database happens in 2 steps. There's the database server. I'm going to click on, go back to this for a second to show you. If I go to plus new, right? This is the way to do it. I want to add in, from a storage account perspective, right, from my click storage, there should be the ability for me to add in a SQL server, right? So here's databases. I've changed things around. Give it a second. Here we go, SQL database. When I go to SQL database, you can. If you have a Microsoft Imagine account, yes, you should be able to. If I click on this, unless they've changed that again, right? So if I go back to here, look, Ludwig. If I go to new, and if I click on, go back to databases, right, you should see a list of databases, yeah? What? Now it's all grayed out? Fantastic, right? It wasn't like that before. Before, you could do this, SQL database. All right, notice I have a DreamSpark account. It says DreamSpark, right? Yay! Now you guys should have Imagine there, right? If you can do this, this is the way it's done, all right? For some people, will be able to do this. Some people will not be able to do this. Also, you can use your pay-as-you-go, but I highly don't recommend to use pay-as-you-go for a database. If you use pay-as-you-go for your database, might as well, start paying $15 a month, because that's how much it's going to cost. Now, that's nice and all, but if you think about it for the life of the time that you're here at school, this can be, or at least for this semester, it can be quite. Does it work for you? Yeah. Okay, it works for you, but not for everybody else. So let's say you create a database name. So let's say the database is going to be called COMP229, right? That's what I would do. Here's my COMP229, right? You must have the DreamSpark or Imagine subscription. Okay, notice the resource group. I'm going to use, if I click Use Existing, I got to pull down a resource group that exists. If you don't have one of these resource groups created already, and this is the same as we made before, you can create a new one. You need to name it. For example, something like Canada. How about My Canada? right? Because I've got Canada East, Canada Central, Canada West, so I can't use those. You could use Canada East if you wanted to. Okay, good. Now here's something. Select source, blank database, a sample, or a backup. You want a blank database here. Okay. I want to configure my server settings. Okay, click configure server settings. By the way, it's all recorded, so if you don't catch this, don't worry. On the right, if you notice, it says the server name. This is the fully qualified domain name. It's actual original server name. I'm going to call mine COMP229, right? Now yours, if you called yours, someone already did it. That's okay. Someone did it before me. So I'm going to call mine Fall 2016. Let's see if that works. There we go. And the admin login name is going to be my login name. I'm going to use a password. My password, so you guys know if you guys want to access my database for testing, is Centennial, right? 2016, exclamation mark, right? So capital C, Centennial, 2016, exclamation mark. And if I've done it correctly, you're going to see this. It's definitely not Brazil South. Please don't use Brazil South. Use Canada, like Canada East as an example. Would be the best, the closest one to us, right? So you see I've done COMP229, I've named it. Please name it yourself. Don't use my name. I made a server admin, Thomas, that's me, right? A password, Centennial 2016 is what I'm using with a capital C and an exclamation mark at the end, right? I'm telling you because you may want to be able to use mine, right? And then locations Canada East, and it says allow Azure services to access the server. Absolutely. If you don't click this on, that would be very bad, right? Now, I'm going to click select. Good, that's the first piece. Next, pricing tiers, free. Has to say free. If it says pay as you go, something's wrong, right? Okay, I'm going to pin this one to the dashboard and click create. Now remember, if it doesn't work for you right now, don't worry. You can go home and do it at home and it should work. Okay, now this is doing two things. I'm creating the database server, right? The database server is going to be called COMP229 F2016, right? Is what the database server is going to be, right? The database itself inside the server is also going to be called COMP229. Two different things. Server name, database name, okay? Now after it deploys the database, right, the server, right, it's going to deploy the database. And you got to give it a little bit of time because right now what it's doing is it's physically creating the database resource and the server online. The server is like a virtual machine, a little virtual machine that just creates it, a little bit of space up on the cloud. As students, we have limitations on how many of these we can create. It's only one per area. So one in Canada East, one in Canada West, one in US East, one in US Central, those kind of things. You cannot create more than one database in each database server either. You can only have one database. Okay, but you can have multiple database servers, but across different areas. Okay, so as you can see, this takes quite a long time for it to be done. And sometimes, I'm just going to put it out there, right? It could take a long, long time. Let's leave it do its business. I'll come back to this later on, and then we'll check it and see when it's fully deployed. As you can see, it's taking quite a bit of time. Because I'm using the DreamSpark account, it's not a priority for Microsoft to create this resource, okay? Just putting it out there. It's low priority, so therefore it'll take its sweet time, right? It's going to be in a queue to have this thing created, right? But it is a learning resource for us, which is really great. Okay, what if I don't have access to this? I'm going to come back to this after it's been created because I got to make some modifications to it. This is not enough, what I've done here. I got to make some changes so that we can access it from here. Otherwise, it's useless, right? We'll come back to this. Oh, it's done. I was talking, hoping that it's going to be done. It looks like this. Okay, so I've got my overview, my activity log, and so on. One thing I need to modify for my database to work 100% from here, if it's going to work at all, is I got to click on the database link. It's going to take me, when you click on the database link, to a bunch of other features, right? So let me go back to that. Let me go back to my Azure. So I'm from here. I have my database created, and this is the actual database server. If I click on here, if I pin it to dashboard, I see the server name. This is the server name itself, COMP229 f2016.database.windows.net. So I actually have a full server ready for me. I gotta click here. Next. Okay, once I've clicked there, it's going to show me additional options, like the resource group, as well as how many databases I have in. How many am I allowed? 1, and it's called COMP229, right? And if I scroll down, right, you can see that there's a firewall setting. I need to open the ports. If I click on firewall, right, on the right, notice that my client IP is 199.212.27.183. Does that make any sense? No, it does not. That is an internal IP address that has nothing to do with my external IP. What I need to do here is create a rule that says everyone, because it's a happy rule, right? And we're going to have a start IP of 0.0.0.0 to 255.255.255.0. Now, for those people who know about networking, what this does is it opens up the entire port range, right? So anybody from my website can administer, anyone from anywhere can administer my database server. Let's click Save. All right, it's going to update the firewall rules. Success, yay. I need to do this in order for my database to be accessible from school, if it's going to be accessible at all. And I'm not convinced it will be. Okay, I'm just telling you right now. Why? Because at school, we block the database. Now, if you wanted to get your bonus points, the 4 bonus points I'm talking about, you create your database, and then you make your connection happen at home, right? Because there you're not blocked. Here, you're blocked, chances are. Let's prove that out and see what I'm talking about here. All right, I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio now. Here's my Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, inside of your Visual Studio IDE itself, there is a window you need to go to called SQL Server Object Explorer, right? You can find this window if I go to View, and if you've got Visual Studio 2015 with Enterprise, that's why I got you guys to get it, you should have SQL Server Object Explorer. Do you have this window? If you don't, you've got a version of Visual Studio that's not compatible with what I'm going to show you, right? I'm going to click on here. SQL Server Object Explorer will bring up all the servers it's connected to, including remote servers like these ones, right? I'm going to get rid of these. You can always disconnect servers like this by right-clicking and disconnecting. I do need these ones. MS Local DB, I'm going to show you this one today, as well as other ones. You might have other ones in here. You may have nothing in here, right? Let's make a connection to the remote server to prove out that it works, that I have a connection. If I can't connect to it through my SQL Server Object Explorer, I won't be able to test it with everything else I'm doing today. Thank you. Let me make a connection. So I'm going to click on this, Add SQL Server, or, right? So click Add SQL Server. It's going to ask me when I click onto this, hey, what kind of SQL Server do I want? Now you may have to log into Azure in order for you to do this, like actually physically be logged in like this. See how I'm logged in? Tom, right? If you're not logged into Azure, you may not be able to see this stuff. I need to go to Azure. And notice that it says, hey, look, this is a good sign. All right, if I can see this, all I have to do is click on it and it'll fill in the details for me, right? This is a beautiful thing. Now, the only way I can do this is if I have the proper extensions in my Visual Studio, the Azure SDK extension. I have to have those in there. I'll show you that later on, as well as Visual Studio 2015 Enterprise Edition, right? I need to have that or else I won't get this. Notice how even if I didn't have this, I could have typed in the name. This is the fully qualified domain name right here, COMP229-F2016-database.windows.net, right? Notice that it's not Windows authentication, right? It's SQL Server authentication, and I need to put in my password. What's my password? Centennial with a capital C, E-N-T-E-N-N-I-A-L, 2016, exclamation mark. For testing, try it out, right? If I click on Remember Password, which I recommend you do, click Connect. We're going to have to do this again. So I'm just showing you this is a good test for us. If this doesn't work, right? If this does not work at all, if I can't connect, this is where the ports are blocked, right? Even though I can see it, may not mean I can connect to it, right? And I'm putting this out for you guys to understand. I'm not trying to be biased or say that it's not working or whatever, but just institutions generally block access to a database unless we open up the ports. As you can see, I have a problem, right? And this is the kind of problem I'm talking about, right? It says a network-related instance-specific error occurred while establishing a connection to SQL Server the server was not found or was not accessible. Verify that the instance name is correct and that the SQL server is configured to allow remote connections. Of course it's allowed for remote connections. I just opened up all the bloody ports, right? So that means that it has to be here. Here's something to try if you want to try to connect my server. Use your smartphone, create a hotspot, and try and connect to my server, right? And it works, right? It'll work because we're not blocked by the school port. There's security that blocks the ports. Even though I can see it here, I can't add it to my SQL Server Object Explorer. And that's how I know it's blocked. In the case that I was live, and one day what I'll do is I'll show it to you live, where I can connect to it. You can physically have a server that's online that will connect nicely. Let's cancel. So what do we do if we can't connect? Well, this is what all of you should be able to do. You should all be able to see some kind of local DB. If you've just installed Visual Studio for the first time, it'll be this one. MS SQL local DB, this one, all right? Okay, can you guys see this one? Local DB. You need at least one. I have another one because I upgraded from Visual Studio 2012 to 2013, right? And actually, I deleted a bunch of them. I had a bunch of them. Let's take a look. If I click on this one, the first one, right, you can see that there's a databases folder. If I open the databases folder, I got a ton of them, right? You may not have this many, right? Because you've only created a few databases, maybe you may have none, right? Maybe just a test server, right? Like some kind of test. Let's make one, okay? I'm gonna make a server local. This is a local server for you to access, okay? Because you need to test what we're doing today, okay? So to create a local server, first of all, you have the server, this is it. A local server, which is SQL Server Express, is loaded in with your Visual Studio Enterprise Edition. It actually has two things. IIS Express, so you can test your pages, localhost, right? As well as a SQL Server Express, right? Which allows you to run a little server that mimics a real SQL server. It's not quite the same power and accessibility, but it has all the features that you want to use, right? So anything you want to check, learn, or whatever, can be right here without going on the web at all. Again, 4 points for going on Azure if you can make it work. You can look it up. You can definitely connect at home, and using this hotspot, you can definitely test with a hotspot if you're going to do it from here. Make sure you've got lots of data because it takes quite a bit of data to do this. All right. And I'm not going to test. If I do it now because I'm recording, it's also going to take all the data from my recording too, which is like crazy. It'll eat my memory like crazy. All right, so I want to create a database. How do I do it? I right-click on the databases, and I want to click Add New Database, right? Let's call it, and you can call it for your machine, comp in lowercase, COMP229, right? Click OK. Okay, if you notice down here, I have a database, COMP229. All I did, again, was right-click on my databases, click Add New Database, and add one. You can add in as many databases as you like, okay? Here's the catch. The catch is every time you add a new database, it takes up memory or space on your hard drive, okay? So lots of databases, lots of space on your hard drive. And that's why Windows keeps on growing and growing and growing and growing like a virus. Sorry, did I say that? So I've got this is nice, but I want to do something with my database because my database is empty. Notice I have no tables with my database, COMP229. How do I do that? Well, if you go up on eCentennial, I have inside your weekly learnings, there is a Contoso database, contoso.sql or SQL file. Please find that file. Please go up on eCentennial. There is a file called contoso.sql. Did you find that file? I have it on my desktop. Right, here it is, inside my COMP229 folder, right? Contoso SQL, this is what it looks like, right? What I want you to do is drag and drop that or load that somewhere you can find it. Do not double click. Let me say that again. Do not double click, all right? If you've double clicked, I know people are going to double click or clicking on it. Clicking on it's okay once, but just don't double click it. It's going to try and do some stuff you don't want it to do. All right, here's what I want you to do though. I want you to right click onto it and click Edit if you're using Windows 10. Or open it up with some kind of a text editor like Notepad, all right? It's okay. Click Edit though in Windows 10. It'll give you this. This is just instructions on loading in data into your database really quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control A and then Control C. So I'm going to highlight everything. Control A is select all, right? Let me do that again. So Control A selects all, Control C for copy. Okay, now that I got that on my clipboard, I can go back to Visual Studio, and inside my database, my tables, where it says there's no tables, I'm going to right-click on my database, COMP229, and I'm going to go to New Query, this one. Right-click on COMP229 and go New Query. Do this with me, guys and girls, so that way you can do what I do. Or else, you will not be able to do this. You have to watch the video again, and you have to go through an hour and a half of me chatting, right? Which is a waste of your time. So I'm going to click New Query. Now, it's going to bring up another little window over here. Notice that it's got a bit of space, and it's pointing at on top. There's a connection right now with my database, COMP229. If it doesn't show that here, you've done something wrong, right? It needs to show your connection here to the database. What did I do? Let's try this again so you see it one more time. I'm in SQL Server Object Explorer. Let me pin this up for a second. I go to my COMP229 database. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go New Query, right? And then I'm going to have this little window here. Now, I have copied everything in my clipboard from my file. I'm going to paste in here, right? It's going to look like this. Now that I've pasted, I want to run my query, right? And if you notice on the top left corner, there's this little button here that says Execute, right? I want to execute my query. Click it. What it's going to do is it's going to insert data into my table so we can play, right? That's what it's going to do. Now that it's inserted data, I can get rid of it. I don't need to save this query. Let's just get rid of it. Okay, no, so it's gone. All right, what do I need to do? Let's check my tables now. This is what you should have. At the end, if you did everything properly, you should have these 4 tables: courses, departments, enrollments, and students. You should have these 4 tables. These 4 tables I created for you with all the data that goes inside. All right? So please follow my instructions or else you'll be behind. All right, this is cool. I like it. I like it. This is good. But it doesn't do anything for us. Okay. Here's what we need to do next. Notice that we have in our project, I have a models folder. Here's my models folder, right? I want to right-click my models folder. Right-click. Let's do this together. And I want to add a new item. Okay? It's going to take me to my Add New Item dialog box in a second. Okay, cool. I want to click Data. We've done this before. If you've been with me on COMP123, you've seen this before, right? Now notice there's a bunch of things you can click here. I want the first one, ADO.NET Entity Data Model. All right? Okay, what is this Entity Data Model thing? We're going to be using the best system we can, the Entity Framework, to connect it to our data, our SQL data server, right? And notice on the bottom there's a request for the name of our model, right? Think about the model as having a bunch of classes that are related to each of the tables of my database, right? Right now, we have 4 tables in the database: courses, departments, and, enrollments, and students. I want to create 4 classes, right, from my database, but I want to do it automagically, right? Why? Because they exist. And normally in the real world, there's 4 ways to create a connection with the Entity Framework. 4 ways. 1, new model from database, an existing database. And most likely, guys and girls, when you work with a database, it already exists, chances are. Most likely, you will not create a new database from scratch unless somehow you're making a brand new website. And reality is, how many of those are you going to make? Not many in the real world. You'll be editing websites, you'll be updating websites, you'll be revising websites, but you'll be using data that already exists. So this is the most common way we're going to do it, okay? So I'm clicking on ADO.NET Entity Data Model, and I'm naming this thing. We know it's the Contoso University database. These are Contoso University tables that I'm using, right? So I'm going to call this Contoso, the Contoso context. Contoso context. It's like a Contoso model. I could have called it Contoso model, but the problem is people get confused with the models folder in my, my Solution Explorer, and I don't want you to be confused with that. It's not a models as in a models folder, it's a context. It's the way that describes all the tables that are in my database. Okay, now that I've got this, I'm going to click Add. I'm going to go to this other screen here. This is very important. Here's 4 choices. The Entity Framework is a relational data wrapper. That's what it does. Right? It's a mapping your relational data. There's 4 things you can do here. I can create my classes automatically, I'll say it again, from my database. My database exists, it'll look at it, right? Visual Studio will look at it and go, let's analyze what's in the database. Tom has 4 tables. Okay, I'm going to create 4 classes, right? Automatically. That's one option. Option 2, an empty EF designer model where I can design my database structure graphically. Here's what it's going to look like, okay? And then from there, the model, it's going to create my class and my tables on the database. But that means the tables will be wiped out. There'll be nothing inside of them. That's a bad scenario in real life because if you wipe out the database data, kiss your job goodbye, right? What do they call that? A resume generating event, right? Something like that. A career limiting move, okay? Don't want to do those kind of things. Be very careful. Do not wipe out any database. Leave the databases alone, people, right? So this is very common. Entity Framework Designer from database. Designer means you're going to get a model that's a picture, like models that look like that. We don't need that here, okay? We don't want to do this one. This will wipe out the database and create models. We don't want that. Empty code first model. We don't have a database and we want to create our classes first. That's another approach, which creates the picture, our model, and our tables, right? This one is the one I mostly use, code first from database, which is the most common approach. Meanwhile, by the way, in our most modern way, the latest framework eliminates this option altogether because it's becoming less and less popular. So this is the most popular approach, code first from database. If I was going to quiz you on it, this is the one you need to use. Right? Why? Because it creates your classes and it takes the existing information from the database so it doesn't destroy anything. And it maps one-to-one what we have in the database. Let's see how that works. I'm going to click Next. Okay, cool. This is the part that really sucks about this whole process. Because we need to create a connection. Even though we have a connection here that shows the SQL Server Object Explorer, we actually physically need to create a new connection here. And it's going to be stored in our web.config file. We talked about web.config last week and global.asax. And our web.config file stores a connection string that allows us to connect to the database. All right? So I can't pull it down. Notice I don't have one that's in here. Right? There's nothing that matches for me. And it may not match for you. You may not have anything in here. What I need to do is click on New Connection. Right? All right, now we're back to this again. And if you didn't pay attention over here, this is a problem. Do you remember what the connection is? By the way, you can't pull it down. It'll just time out. Please don't do that. Right? Don't click on this button. You're just going to wait and wait and wait. Right? Do you know what it is? What's the connection? Do you know the database? Do you know what the actual database server is called? The answer is most of you probably do not. All right? Let me show you how to do this. So let's back out of this change. This is good. We're going to do it one more time. Look at this. MS SQL, la 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 la. It's right here. Local database, MS SQL, local DB. That's the one I want. Now, if you don't have that here because you don't have a connection string, I'm going to click Cancel, and I'm going to scroll up until I see this, right? This is what I want to stay visible with me. It's a quick way of doing it, right? So I can see what the database, the SQL server is called. Now, in a real-world scenario, I would do what I did with Azure. I would say COMP229-F2016.windows.database.net. That is my connection string. That's the fully qualified domain name that I need to use for Azure, right? Azure doesn't work here, right? So we need to do something locally to test with. In the future, I'll show you how it works remotely. I'll do it. But for now, let's do this. Okay, so I need to have this. Do it again. So I'm going to right-click on the models. You'll see it one more time. I'm going to click Add. I'm going to go New Item. I'm going to go to Data under Visual C#. I'm going to click on ADO.entity data model. I'm going to change the name to Contoso Context. Context, which is the context that I'm using. Click Add. I'm going to get back to this point. I'm going to click on Code First from Database. There we are, right? And then click Next. Now, I need the name of the connection, which is right here. I'm going to click New Connection. I'm going to put that name in exactly as you see it. Local, DB, and then, /MS SQL LOCAL local DB. That's what it's got to look like, because it's the same as this. That's the name of the server, the little server that's packaged with Visual Studio 2015. Okay, notice that it says Windows authentication. That is correct. But if we were doing real life work with Azure, it wouldn't be this, it would be this, right? SQL Server authentication, which is my name, Thomas, and in this particular case, as an example, the name of my database or my password. Okay. Now, to test it, here's the great way to test it. If this is correct and you're using Windows authentication or you've logged in properly in a real world scenario, you should be able to pull it down right here. Click. And you should see this. If you don't see that, and if it goes bang, timeout, then you got your connection wrong. Right? So you should be able to see this, COMP229. Huh? You got to see this, local DB, MS SQL local DB. This is what's going to be here. Then you got to be able to, you would have had to create your COMP229 database ahead of time, like we did, right? And now you're choosing your database name right here. Okay, now that I've got this, you can also test your connection. There's a little button here that says test connection. If you don't get this, test connection succeeded, right? Then something's gone wrong. Yes? Okay, maybe, Wendell, can you help him out? Thank you. Huh?
I'm working with that.
So you got to put in here, you got to put the server name, which is, in my case, mine is COMP229-F2016.windows.database.net, right? And then for an authentication, you can't use Windows authentication, you got to use SQL Server authentication, right? And then you got to put in your username as Thomas and your password as Centennial 2016 with a capital C, 2016, and an exclamation mark at the end. That's my password that I'm using right now for you guys to test with. Okay, you can make your own. Then I'm gonna press OK. Okay? Once I've done this, I've got the connection. Notice that it changed the connection string down here. Please do not change this connection string. Here's one thing we do have to change. It tells us the name of our connection string in our web config. I don't want to leave it as Contoso context. I want to change this thing to Contoso connection. Please change this to Contoso connection. So there's two parts. The Contoso context, which is all your classes, and this is what it's going to be looking like in your web.config, Contoso connection. All right? If you don't name these properly, it's going to come back to bite you later on. Right? Are you with me? I know this is a few steps, but this is what we need to do to connect to a database, right? Once we're done here, we're going to click Next. And if everything goes well, you should see the tables come up, right? Notice that under the DBO settings, we have courses, departments, enrollments, and students. I want them all. Okay? You should see those too. I want them all. And then click, notice there's another area here that says pluralize or singularize generated object names. Please leave that checked. It's important. And then click Finish. All right, now, what it's going to do, if everything works well, and it didn't work, the wizard will continue to run, but the resulting project may not be built properly. It's okay, because you know what I didn't do? I didn't build my project. And I'm going to go back and do it again. So it's going to keep running, and I'm going to go do it again. Okay, I'm going to do it again to show you from the beginning. So you can say one more time, right? Because I took my time with this thing. Okay, there we go. The entity framework package is not installed in the project, right? So that's the problem that I have. I don't have an entity framework package installed. How do I install that package? And I'm going to click cancel here for a second. So it didn't do anything for me. But one thing it did was, look, it did create the Contoso context. I'm going to kind of delete this thing. Let's start from scratch. Now, this isn't enough when you mess up, like I did. One of the things that it happens also, see this little check mark here? That means web.config was changed too. Let's change this up. Notice in my web config now, I have a connection string, most likely. Let's make sure we do. And if it's there, we got to kill it. Okay, looks like we're good. We don't have a connection string. If I had a connection string in web.config, I'd have to remove it because it'll mess me up. Okay, so please leave it as is. All right, so now I'm back to square one. So what it's asking me for is, under NuGet packages, it wants me to install the entity framework. So what I can do is prepare for that in advance. First, let's build my project, because sometimes that's required. So it's going to restore, this is the problem, it has to restore my NuGet packages. See that? That was the reason why it failed. So I made my template and I didn't run it for the first time, right? So if I run this thing for the first time now, it should just work the way it is. Let me show you. It's the way it was before with our nav bar the way it was. If it doesn't work, something's not right. This is good. All right. Now there's two options I have. I could try and install the framework, the entity framework myself, but now it should work because I've run and built my project for the first time. I'm going to right click. Let's try this again. One more time. Add, new item. I'm going to go to Visual C# data, ADO.NET entity data model, change this to Contoso context, right? And then click add. Then click this one, code first from database, right? Now, if you don't have these choices, you may have the wrong version of Visual Studio 20, all that's installed, right? Click next. This is incorrect. And notice I don't have a connection that I need. Oh, I already did my connection, so it's right here. Luckily, it remembered what it was. Here's my data source and everything else. Or you could have gone through that whole thing and click new connection, and it'll make one for you. Luckily, it remembered what it was, which is good. And it can't be Contoso context. It's got to be Contoso connection, right? All right, changes. Next. It should show me my tables, which is good. All right, that's what I want, like this. If I go previous, by the way, you can always go back and forth, see? It's not going to hurt you, right? But I don't want context, I want connection, because that's how it's going to be stored in the web.config file. All right, next. All this click. Now, this should work. Let's see if it works now without giving me an error. Work, baby, work, or I'll have to download and include entity framework, which I don't want to do. Yay, it worked. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, let's take a look and see what I got. So it went out and got some stuff with NuGet. It got some stuff. Let's take a look at my NuGet package manager and see what it got for me. So right click, and I'm going to go manage NuGet packages. And I'm going to see that, I'm going to unpin this one for a second, okay, just so that you can see more. I'm going to see that I've got entity framework. This is a package that's required, right? And notice that I got version 6.1.3, right? Okay, I got to talk about entity framework a little bit more. 6.1.3 is not compatible with the drag and drop stuff that's included in your toolbox. So if you looked at the book and it says, hey, drag and drop from your toolbox to create some kind of data grid view or something like that, it will not work. It's not compatible with version 6, okay? So we're going to do things by hand, right? Which is how we normally should be doing things. We can drag and drop and create the framework for my data connection, right? But the rest of the stuff we're going to be doing tonight is all by hand, right? So when we create our model, it looks right. Okay, that's number one. Second thing, if I have an update, the only one that you should see as an update is jQuery, which we're not going to touch because jQuery is required, that works and is configured properly for Bootstrap. So leave that alone. So this is what you should have now. Bootstrap, Entity Framework, Font Awesome, jQuery, Microsoft Code DOM Providers .NET compiler platform, which we haven't touched, and Microsoft .NET compilers. Those are the things that you should have. And remember, if you're using my template, COMP229 F2016 Lesson 4 from GitHub, all these things are proper. Here's what you won't have. If you don't have inside of your Visual Studio, if I go back to SQL Server Object Explorer, you will not have this table inside of LocalDB, MS SQL, LocalDB, blah, 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 right? You won't have that. If I upload this to GitHub, you have to create this in your local database. This is local, like to your machine local, right? That's why it's nice to practice with, but we really want to do something with Azure because then it's global. Everyone can see it, right? Okay, that's fantastic. Let's see what else Entity Framework has done for us. Entity Framework not only did that, but I'm just going to hide this one for a second. If you look at our Solution Explorer window, under Models now, we have some stuff. I have the following. Contoso context, right? Let's look at that one first. If I look at that class, I have the following. I have a partial class called Contoso context, which is inheriting from another class called DB context. DB context is actually a global class using the entity framework. It's using this system.data.entity namespace, right? That's how this is working. Now, because we've inherited, we have additional methods that we can call upon, okay? Take a look at this. We actually call upon our Contoso connection right in our constructor, right? So our constructor calls the root or the superclass constructor, the base constructor, and passes in a path, the name of our connection to the superclass, right? This is required. If we don't have this, we cannot connect to the database. In fact, every time we call the Contoso context or the Contoso connection, we're referring to the database itself. Okay? Now, here's something that's interesting. I got courses, I got departments, I got enrollments, I got students, and I got a problem. Look at my class. It's called course without an E. Why did this happen? Because, remember the option we chose was pluralize or singularize. That was one of the options we chose when we chose our tables. We need to change this, people, because if we leave it as course, it's going to mess up. It's not going to look right, and it's not going to be understandable. How do we do that? Don't do it by hand. I recommend right-click and go rename. And let's change our course from course with an S to course with an E. Like this, and press enter. Now it's going to ask you to rename everything across your entire context, and the answer is yes, please. So it's going to rename this, and it's going to make all references to course with an S change to course with an E. All right, that's important. Now it's just because this was originally called courses, and it took away the E and the S, like something else, like houses, right? And it doesn't know what to do here. Okay, good. Let's take a look at our course class. Our course class, again, the models are just classes, right? It's done a couple things. It says, well, look, it has our course ID, right? It also has a title, credits, a department, right? And other things. Well, what this is pointing out, this is describing what the table looks like in the database. So if I want to use the entity framework to connect to the database, I can just create a new object of type course, and then after I create that object of type course, I can say course.courseID or course.title or course.credits, and I can access the database table through my connection. We're going to talk about this together, right? And I've done that for departments and enrollments and student. Okay? We're going to save these. I haven't made any changes, but I'm going to save everything and get out of here. So that's what models do. So Entity Framework is a fantastic framework because it allows us to get references to our database, right? And again, there's three approaches: database first approach, code first approach, model first approach. Again, if I was going to reiterate, model first approach, picture of the model creates our code and our database tables. Model first, right? Code first, we create our classes by hand, right? Creates the model and the tables. Why would I do that? I got to create my classes by hand? Are you kidding me? Third way, right? Use my database to create my classes. Who cares about what the picture looks like? Which is what I'm doing right now, right? That's the best way. Actually, not the best way. It's the most common way. You have to use whichever method you want to match with the requirements of the application you're building, right? If that makes sense to you. Okay, cool. So this is the first piece. I'm going to upload this to GitHub because I've made a connection. So you'll have my web.config file, but you can check and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go to Team Explorer, and I'm going to go to Changes. Now you can see all the changes that happened. I added all these things to the model folder, right? Plus I changed my web config, my packages config, because I added in the entity framework, as well as my project configuration file as well in the background. Okay, these are all adds, and these are changes. Okay, I'm going to say added connection to local database. Now this is important, right? Via entity framework. Okay. Commit. Hold on. Home. Sync. Push. And then it's going to push this up, right, to GitHub. Now. For your group project, you need to have a database. This is part of what the exercise is, right? Now, what if, putting it out there, I don't have access to Azure with you and you don't use the SQL database server on Azure? How do I get access to your data? How do I test it out? You need to export the SQL file, and I'll show you how to do that later on. When you submit your final project, I'll show you how to also submit that extra SQL file, SQL, like I showed you. And then I can take that information and import it into mine and recreate your database, right? That's what I'm going to do. So I can still test your stuff out, but I'm going to need you to export that file. And we'll talk about how to do that in a later lab, or whatever, okay? It won't be now. Because right now it's just, I'm just showing you, I'm demonstrating how to do this stuff, right? Later on we'll come back to it. Okay. We need to make some changes because about, contact, default, and projects and services aren't all the things we need. Projects and services can go bye-bye, right? Because we don't need them. So let's get rid of them in our project. So project's gone. Service is gone, right? Because we don't need those pages. You know what? Contact and default and about, they're okay, right? But I want to add in the same other links that I'm missing: courses, departments, enrollments, and students. I want to add those 4 new pages, right? So courses, departments, enrollments, and students. Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to still use my site master page. Okay, so right click, I'm going to click add, and I'm going to go to web form with master page, right? And I'm going to say again courses. I'm going to leave it blank for now, right? I'll come back to this in a second. I just want to change the title, page title, to courses, right? So save. And then I'll do the same thing, right click. Okay, I'm going to say add web form with master page, or you can also go to your new item and then add a web forms with master page in there. Departments. Okay, there we are. And again, I'll change that title to departments. Okay, save. And so courses, departments, enrollments, and students, right? So right click, I'm gonna add a new web form with master page, students. Students. Save. Just changing the page title so we can see that it works. And enrollments. So add web form with master page, enrollments. There you go. Okay, cool. There it is. So we've got enrollments, departments, courses, and students, and a bunch of other ones. Now I got another problem. My links don't match up anymore, right? So I got to go into my site master page where I have all my links, double click, and notice under here, under my nav bar, right, I have projects and services. Let's just delete those. No more projects and services because they don't exist anymore. It's just home, about, contact, and then the other pages, right? Okay, I need something to model after, right? Because I'm just going to kill this thing first so you can see this. Oops. So I don't need all these links anymore. The links I deleted was, I deleted my projects and services. I want to add a couple more. So I'm going to kind of take my home link as a model, and I'm going to copy and paste a couple of times, or a few times, 4 times actually. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I want to do is I want to call this next one, it can't be home. I'm going to start on the right hand side with the text. So it's going to be courses, students. Again, you can do this different ways. Departments, right? Enrollments. These are all the things that I have in my pages. Now again, you could have also done a pull-down menu like Contoso with a bunch of those things in there too, right? Like almost like a sub pull-down menu if you want. I'm going to make it all on the main page just to make it easier. Okay, let's change these links. This doesn't exist anymore, so it's going to be called courses. Then this default link is going to be called students. Make sure you type it in properly so it matches with what the pages you made, departments. And my default's going to be enrollments. Okay, and then these ones for our page switcher, right? We need to change these too. So lowercase, it's going to be called courses, just to match up with our style, right? Students, departments, and under here, enrollments. Hey, cool. So I've done all those. Now we got to change our symbols because our icons make no bloody sense, right? Like home, 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 right? So I need to find one for courses, one for students, one for departments, and one for enrollments. I also want to change my brand. Instead of this saying example ASP.NET site, we're going to call it Contoso University. Let's say we're building a university page, right? So I want to change my Fort Awesome. I got to change this one. So I got to go to Font Awesome in a second. And also, if you look down here in the bottom where it says example ASP.NET site, I want to change this to Contoso University in the footer. So if you're looking at my files, so we know that we're building a Contoso University website. Okay? Let's change these icons to make sense. So I'm going to save this page. I'm going to kind of go over to Font Awesome for a second. Let's check Font Awesome and see which ones we're going to choose. Font Awesome. And I want to go to icons, and I want to see if I can find something for courses. So I want to say course, right? How about I do the right place? Course. There we go. There's no course. How about like a map, right? There's map, markers, map. That might be something we can use for courses. The other thing is book, right? I can think of books for courses, right? Like that might be a good indicator for courses, book, right? So I want to kind of use book. That's what it's going to look like, FA book. So I'm going to go back to this. And for courses, I'm going to change this to book. Does that make sense? That's what it's going to look like now. Good. Now, how about departments? Let's see if there's one for departments. Is there something like that? Well, let's see if there's one that kind of makes sense. So I'll say department. There's nothing. How about section? A puzzle piece. Department. Makes sense, right? So I'll use puzzle piece for this one. And it's actually puzzle, FA puzzle dash piece, this one. So copy, go over back to here. And instead of FA home for departments, I'm going to come back to student in a second. Here's departments. I'm going to change this to FA puzzle piece, right? So it's kind of a different icon, right? Okay, we have enrollments and we have students. Let's do students next. So we have students. So student. Okay, we have there's a graduation cap. You know what? I like graduation cap for the university, eh? But we'll talk about that. How about school? Maybe there's something for school. Is there something for school? There's graduation cap, right? Because it kind of finds, graduation cap might be the one we want to use for the university itself, right? I mean, obviously I'd want to probably have a real logo for the university if I was going to do it. But for now, I think I'm going to use graduation cap for my brand, right? So again, I'm going to go over here and go over to where it says Fort Awesome on the brand on line 30 and change this to graduation cap. Okay, cool. I need to find one for students and I need to find one for enrollments. All right, so enrollments and students. Let's think about this for a second. Students are like people, right? So let's see if I have a people. And I do have users. That could be students, right? I also have, I can go person, right? So a user, but that might be okay for user. I can't use male, female because that's a little bit, it's wrong. That's genderism right there, right? So something like user or users, that might be okay. You can also like search through to see if there's anything that makes sense for students, right? Like if I just take this out, and one thing you can do is you can kind of go through and see if there's anything that makes more sense to you, right? That makes sense for this kind of stuff, right? Maybe there's something that speaks to you more than just one of the things that we've chosen, right? Like maybe I want to use the peace sign, hand peace sign for I'm saying, maybe it's the one we want to use, right? We have graduation cap. Group, that's also something else, a little bit different than users, right? There might be other things in here that we want to use, like paper plane, right? Something that's not exactly about, students, but, something that makes sense, or a blackboard. Maybe that's what we want to use, some kind of blackboard symbol. Do we have a blackboard? Blackboard. Black tie. How about a board? Graduation cap, see? Comes back to graduation cap again. But again, you see where I'm going, right? I'm trying to find something that makes sense. In reality, we probably want to choose something that, here's one, PA for user. We'll use that one, right? Or a pie chart. You might want to use a pie chart. That's probably cool too, right? Because pie chart could be like, data for the pie chart, grades. How about grade? Oh, wrong place. Grade. Graduation cap, trademark, right? Everyone likes that graduation cap, right? But yeah, if I go, like pie, if I go pie chart, then there's puzzle piece and there's also pie chart. We can also use pie chart as well to kind of show, I don't know, maybe that makes sense. I like, paper airplane or something else like that. So if I go paper, here's my paper plane, right? Or paperclip, something like that. There's one. Pied Piper. I don't know why PP, maybe it's the actual site. Or hand for users. I don't know. Something. Let's use this one. And I'm going to use the plain -O. O stands for outlines. That's usually what it stands for. It looks like this, right? So FA plain O. Now you might say, like, why are you spending so much time doing this kind of stuff? Because you got to think about these things if you're going to plan stuff for users or for students, right? So I'm going to just change this piece. And the same thing goes with enrollments. Okay, enrollment's almost like a map or some kind of courses, right? So I'm back to, you putting in course, and I'm going to get that same thing. Maybe what I want to put is the map, kind of a map piece there for that one. I can use this one, or I can use this one. I can also use a gear. I can use a globe. There's all kinds of stuff you can think about using. How about Street View? This one, enrollments. That might be good for, actually Street View might be good for students. I'm saying, I'm putting it out there. You guys have to think about what works best for you. I'm going to use map O for enrollments, right? So just to kind of use something. And again, you could also create your own custom ones, which is in real life what we do, right? We don't like just choose stuff from Font Awesome. This is just a quick and dirty placeholder. Okay, cool. We've got this. Now I got to get into the Site Master page, right? Because remember, I want my fast page switching to work, right? So I'm going to go into where it says Site Master, right? I'm going to right click and click on View Code F7, right? Which is going to bring up this stuff. Remember we did this last time? Project's not going to work, and neither will services because they don't exist anymore. So let's get rid of those. However, we will have the other ones, right? So I'm going to copy home, and I'm going to start typing those in. So I'm going to kind of copy and paste, right? So I'm just going to say something like paste, and then paste, and then paste, and then paste. 4 more, right? So which is, students, don't have to be in any courses, doesn't have to be in any particular order, departments, and enrollments. So we're checking for those. And then, of course, this has to be all different. So it has to be students, right? And then this is, can I spell properly, Tom? Spell. And this is courses. And this is departments. And this is enrollments. There we go. So I got all that. And that's it. That's all the difference. That's all the changes I need to make it all work. I think I copied an extra break statement, which I'm going to get rid of. There we go. And now we should have everything working. Let's test it, right? So I'm going to test with Google Chrome. It should build my project, which is really super important to do, to build your project at this point. And then let's see what I get. Again, I'm laying things out, the groundwork for what we do over the next 3 weeks. That's why I'm doing this, right? Yay, courses, students, departments, enrollments, about, and contact. And I have my Cartosa University. So I have a bunch of links now that I didn't have before. If I click on courses, I don't have anything there yet. Students, departments, enrollments, about, and contact. I have these things left over from last week. I want to pick one to do, and I want to pick students to work on. So before we finish the day. So here's students. I want to make this little chart. So whenever I click on students, I want to see all the students come up from the database, right? How do I do that? So let's click on stop. I want to go to students, right? Here's my students page. And inside my main content, this is where I'm going to drag and drop my stuff. Now, see these pages? That's all the code I have to write, right? And I'm going to write this because I want you to get a sense of all the things that we have to do to make to make these piece parts work. All right. First, I'm going to get my students working, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing so you have a clear idea of what's happening. Okay. First things first. What I want to do is get a grid view going, right? So I can type it 2 ways. I can drag and drop. Here's something I can do. I can go to my tools, my toolbox, right? And you might be forgiven to think that I can take under data, I can take my grid view, put it there, and it's going to work. It's going to give you nothing. And it can't connect it to a data source because of that entity framework problem I talked about earlier. It won't work. So I'm going to drag and drop. Okay, good. All this thing does, I'm just going to unpin that, is give you the basics. It's called Grid View 1. Is that really descriptive ID? No. Just like any other tool, we want to name it so it's reflective of what we're using it for. It's going to be the grid view for our students. Students grid view, right? Let's change that name. So students grid view. Yay. Our students grid view is alive, all right? We don't just want that for our grid view though, right? I also want to add in a couple of additional things, right? For example, right now it'll try and auto-generate the columns. I'm going to split this grid view up like this, okay, where it says grid view. I want you to see this, right? So inside here, I want you to set up another option, right? And notice there's a lot of options that come up. And I want to click on auto-generate columns, and I want to set this to false. Why? Typically what happens with web forms is it tries to auto-generate all the columns for you because we use another kind of data binding connection. Like for example, without the entity framework. This will not work because I told you it's not going to work, right? So we need to auto-generate columns to false. Because we're choosing auto-generate columns to false, right, we need to create our columns in here. So I'm going to create another thing called columns. Follow me here. And inside of our columns, we're going to define each of our columns manually, right here, okay? Now there's a couple columns we can create. Now I want to hit a couple things. I want to hit my student ID, my last name, my first mid name, and my enrollment date. I think I need to get all those, right? So how do we do that? I want to open up a bracket. Notice that they give us a specific type of control we can enter, right? Notice that there's not a big list here because I'm inside of the column tag. The column tag only allows me to put in different kinds of fields that link to data, okay? So I want to use, and the most common one is bound field, right? So let's click on bound field. All right, I want to start typing. And I'm going to say something like, I want to indicate what my data field is. My data field is equal to, right? And it's got to match the exact name of my student class. Well, what if you don't know it? Well, this is beautiful. So you go to your content, your models, you go to your students class, double click, and you can see the fields. There they are, student ID, last name, first mid name, and enrollment date. Right? Those are the ones we want to connect to. And those are the data fields. Right? So if I go back to my student ASPX, my data field starts with student ID. That's where I'm getting it from, just to let you know. Right? I'm not making it up. It's not going to give you code hinting here. Right? It's not. Next, my header text is important. Header text. This is the header text of my field, of my column. These are the columns I'm defining, right? My column is also going to be called student ID, right? Notice how I can add a space in my header text. And I have to put an equal sign, Tom. There we go. All right? Now, let me just unbind this thing so you can see this a little bigger, right? This is for the first column, all right? Next, I want to say my visibility is equal to true. I want to turn my visibility on explicitly to make sure that it's true. Done. That's my first field. So that's my first column that I'm defining. Okay, next, ASP bound field. My data field, instead of being a student, is going to be my last name. It's got to match exactly like this. My header text is going to be equal to my last name, like this. The visibility is also going to be set to true. I'll do another ASP bound field for my data fields, right? And we're going to talk about how this is mapped. And this is important. It's called first mid name. That's weird. First mid name. Header text. That's the name of my database field, though, right? I have no choice for that. And my header text is going to be, instead of first mid name, just call it first name. First name. Visibility is equal to true. Again, by default it's true, but I'm making it explicit for a reason. Later on we'll find that out. And then an ASP bound field with a data field where is, instead of first mid name, it's going to be called enrollment date. Enrollment date, that's actually a field, right? My header text is going to be equal to enrollment date, like that, and my visibility is going to be true. That's it. Now we have our field, our columns that we've defined for our table. By the way, grid views are the most popular and most pervasive data tool that we're going to use in web forms. Why? Because it links us into the database and allows us to read the data from our database, right? Without touching anything. We're going to add to this next week. We're going to modify this. We can add additional functionality. For now, all I want is to connect to the database and read the data, right? This is the first piece I want, right? Okay, nice, but it doesn't do anything. In fact, if I save it and if I build it, right, here's my build my solution, right? It'll be successful, right? But remember, have I told it anywhere what to do? No. If I press play, even though it doesn't generate fields, it's going to do nothing for me. My students.aspx page is going to be absolutely blank except for my nav bar. Why? If I right click here and if I look at view page source, you can see that down in here inside the weeds, right? I have my navbar default, here's this, and down in my main content, I have a couple of div tags, and that's it. Why? I got no data. So Visual Studio says, you know, but got nothing. There's no connection. I got no data bound control, nothing. It's just a structure, and it's not going to put the structure in place until I make a connection. I'm just putting it out there to you so you understand, right? Let's fix that problem. Now, we did the front end. We've designed the HTML part with ASP.NET controls on the front end. Now we got to do the back end, and this is the most critical piece. So how do I do the back end? It's in the code behind file. Remember, there's the front part, student.aspx, and in my Solution Explorer, I have a code behind file where the data sits, right? So I'm going to go right click, and I'm going to open up F7, view code, right? And here's our, oh, I meant to go here to our students right here. Right click and F7 to view code. There it is. Notice that there's nothing in here, just a page load of it. Okay, here's what I want to do. I want to check to see that the page is only loading for the first time, because if I go back to it again, especially when I'm dealing with data, I don't want, if I refresh the page, right, to connect to the database again, do all that stuff again. I only want it to do it if I've never loaded the page before. So what I want to do is I want to use a special command called, and I'm going to say if I'm loading the page for the first time, right? I want to populate the student table, right? The student grid view. That's what I want to do. Those are my comments so you can see what I'm saying. So this is my almost think about this as my pseudocode here, right? I'm doing it in a page load event. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say if not is post back, right? So if I'm not getting a post back, if I'm not going to this page and revisiting it a second time, right? Then what I want to do is I want to get, here's my pseudocode again, get the student data. I want to get the student data, right? Okay, cool. Well, I don't have a method to do that. And I could put it in my is post back, but that's really bad form. I want to make another method. And I'm going to call this method get students, right? I don't have that. It's going to turn red. It's normal because I don't have that method. Let's make that method. I'm going to go outside of my page load event down on the bottom, right? And I'm going to create my new method called get student, right? It's going to be, and I recommend this, let's make it protected or private. It doesn't matter. Here's private. Let's make it private for now. I'll make it private. I'll make it returns void, and we're going to call it get students, right? Get students. Okay. Notice that the underline goes away. Let's also talk about what this thing does. And I'm going to use the // methodology for this one. So // let's add a summary. This method gets the student data from the DB, right, from the database. That's what it does, okay? Notice that I also have, it doesn't return anything. It returns void. I could put that in there up here. I won't do that right now. We're going to go back to, we're going to revisit commenting later on. So the first thing I need to do is connect I need to connect to the entity framework. Okay? If I don't connect to the entity framework, right, I got nothing, right? I need to connect to the entity framework. Let's do that first. So the first thing I need to do is connect. Here's how we do it, and this is beautiful. Using, open bracket, default. If I go to, Contoso, if I start typing Contoso connection, see, do I get Contoso connection here? How come I'm not getting that? That's the connection that I want to connect to, right? Here's why I'm not getting it. On the top, do I have a connection to my models? No. I need to add the models folder in here. So I'm going to go something like this, using, and by the way, you know what? I might want to put a couple things in here. I made a comment here, right? So I need using statements, right, that are required, right, to connect entity framework or to entity framework database. Okay, that's what I want to do. A couple of using statements. One of them is using, and then the name of my framework, which is COMP229 F2016 lesson 4. That's what I called it. You might have called it something else. Dot models. I need to kind of tap into that. There's one more I want you to put in. Using system.web, right, dot model binding, right? I want you to click on that as well. Those are the two using statements or namespaces I'm going to use to connect to my database. We're going to do this over and over again, by the way. Don't worry if you've only seen this once, and I don't expect you to remember it. As long as you can access it on GitHub, I'm good. As long as you know that we have to add in a couple of using statements, I'm good. Okay? Next, let's scroll down. Now let's go back to that using statement that didn't work. Let's type it in now. Using Contoso. Is it Contoso context? Right? That's what it is, right? Contoso context. That's the database. Remember I told you about this? And we're going to call this DB for database. You can also call it database if you really want to. I don't recommend doing it that big because we're going to use it. So let's say call DB for database is equal to a new Contoso context connection. That's what it is, right? If you can't get this, it's because you haven't added the using statements in there, all right? And then you have to have this code block. So I'm saying, using this connection, do the following. So connect to the database and then do the following. By the way, this is not the only way we can do it, all right? For example, I can create this DB connection somewhere at the top of my code as a class variable, and then you reuse this over and over again. In this particular case, because we're only doing it to connect with students, I'm only going to do it in here. This is not the only way we can do this, and we'll talk about other ways later. Okay, we're going to use a little bit of link, and for those people who have me for COMP229, you're going to see link again, right? Which is a standard way of connecting with our, it's part of our query language. We're going to use a query to connect to the database, and it's going to look just like query language, okay? We're going to talk about link next week at length. How do we do it? So I want to, here's my pseudocode. I want to query the student table. I want to query the student table using entity framework and link. Okay, link, all right, is our standard language for querying the database, right? It's actually a really cool group of libraries that we use to query the database, okay? So first we make a connection. That's the first thing. Then we use link to query the database. And we're going to do the following. I'm going to create a new, I'm going to use the var keyword. Now, follow me here for a second. Remember we talked about var in COMP123 and what it does. It's the same idea. Var students, and I'm going to use a capital S for students in this particular case, is equal to, I'm going to open up a bracket, I'm going to say from, and I'll call this, I'll talk about this, right? All students, right? In, notice that comes up, db dot students. See how beautiful that is, right? So it actually finds the table in the database that I want to query, right? And then I say select, right? There's my select statement, all students. So what is this like? This is like saying, you know, from all students, select star. Get everything, right, from my database, right? Now what it's going to do is it's going to create, if I hover over this, it actually says to me, I'm going to create something called an iQueryable object, right? I could make it an iQueryable instead of calling var. Var is not like JavaScript. For those people who didn't see this before, var is almost like saying, I want to implicitly detect what students is. And I talked about duck typing last time. It's almost like saying, hey, if it walks like a duck and acts like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is a duck, right? So it's like students, it has to be something to do with this. Well, you know what? Visual Studio is saying it's an iQueryable object that's of type student. Okay, student is our class that's in our models folder that automatically got generated when we made the connection with the entity framework to the database table. All right? Don't worry if you don't get this and you're not going to remember this. We're going to do this over and over again until you get the hang of it. And we're going to be talking about LINQ again. This is not the first time we're going to talk about it. All right? We're using LINQ, a language, a query language of a type, to connect to the database. That's all we're doing here. And we're doing a read. This is our read, right? Okay, now that we've got this, right, what we want to do is do the following. I want to bind, right? I want to bind the result to the student's grid view. That's what I want to do. I want to bind the result, whatever I get from here, to the student's grid view. How do I do that, right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to call up the student's grid view. We named it student's grid view, right? So I'm going to say student's grid view. Here it is. Dot data source. It's one of our properties, right? Is equal to students, right? There's our data source, students, dot. I'm going to convert this to list. So I'm going to create a list of my students. I'm going to say, take our students, the student object we just got, convert it to a list. Okay? So I take all my students that I got from my students table and convert that whole thing into a list of students, right? And then the final thing is students grid view, this is the last line, dot data bind. That's it. So what, couple of steps. So one, connect to the database or the entity framework, the database, entity framework DB, I'll put that in, DB, right? Here I query the database with EF, entity framework, and LINQ, which is the structured, the query language, the SQL language I'm using. Is almost, I could use a query language in here instead, right? ADO, I could use ADO.NET, but instead I'm using LINQ to do that. That's the language that allows me to have this syntax. That's all it does. I have the from, the in, and the select statements. I also have a where if I want to filter. So from students, select all students where student ID is equal to whatever ID I get, as an example, if I really want to do a filter, right? Okay, so I've got this. Then I data bind back to the data source. I get the information from the students, convert it to a list, and I just drop it into my data source. Now remember, because I specified in my students' web page, right, what the items are. These are exact matches for the fields. So I'm saying, hey, get those data fields, and these fields themselves are going to align with the columns in the table where that's going to fill in from the database. That's what's going to happen. Let's try this out and see if it works, and see if we get an error. We'll see. And if everything goes well and you connect properly, you should see something, right? If you see nothing, we can go and query and find out what it is. There you go. Is it beautiful? No, it's ugly. Let's make it nice. But this is step one. Step one is you should get this. This is an actual proof that you're connected to the database, right? So I'm doing my first read operation. I'm reading from the database. Remember, I want to do full CRUD with you guys. Create, read, update, and delete right before we're done for midterm, right? And also show you how to log in and log out. Those are all things we got to do over the next couple weeks, right? So that's why it's very important you don't miss these classes and you watch the videos and try stuff out on your own. And I'm going to give you things to do to start setting things up for your project, okay? So this is like the very minimum. If I was going to read your game for that particular week, right? I'm going to use entity framework. I'm going to create my data tables, and I'm going to read from my data my database. I'm going to read all the data that comes from my particular game, that particular game for that particular week, right? Okay, this is ugly. Let's make it pretty, right? Are you guys good? Am I freaking you out? Are you afraid? No? She's shaking her head too. You okay? You okay? You okay? Okay. Anyone not okay? It's okay not to be okay. You're not okay? What happened to you? Okay, we'll fix it. Let's fix this thing up. Now, how do I make this nice? Okay, stop. Stop. You did the exact same thing I did. After this, Wendell, I'm going to put this up to, I'm going to pump this up to GitHub, and hopefully, you and I have done the same thing, right? By the way, it's not uncommon to get errors for this kind. We're connecting to a database, peoples, right? Database connections are really fragile, and they don't work properly. If you don't set it up right, it's not going to work. Okay, this is really ugly, and the reason for it is because we really haven't styled it at all. So I want to create a style for this, right? So in order for me to do this, I know I need a couple things. I need a div for a container. I need a div with a row. I need a div with some kind of column that I'm going to put my data tables in. So I need those things set up. So let's put those divs in place. This is Bootstrap. So a div, here's the shorthand, div with a class of row. Inside that, I want a div. Well, actually, sorry, div with the class of container first. And then inside, div with the class of row. And then inside, I want to have a div with a class of column dash medium dash offset. You guys have seen this before. And instead of 6, I'll use 2. And then I'll say column dash medium, because it's a big table, right? Dash 8, right? So 8 in the middle, 2 on the left, and 2 on the right, for a total of 12. Tab, right? That's where I want my grid view to be. So I'm going to take my grid view, I'm going to cut it, I'm going to put it back in here, paste, right? I'm going to kind of select everything, and you can format my selection so it looks nice, right? And then if you see this, I know you guys are making fun of me. If you see this thing, you can also see that there's a grid view, right, with a CSS class that I want to put in. So I can put my CSS class, let's put it on the next line. You can do that too. I can split the tag, to go like this, and I can say something like CSS class. So if I press Control Space, CSS class, that's what it is equal to, let's take a look, right? What I want with my CSS class. It's got to be a table, right? I'm going to use table bordered, right? And I'm going to put table striped, and I'm going to use table hover, right? And all this stuff, by the way, I'm not making up. It's all from Bootstrap, right? That's why I put it on the next line. So I'm going to style my table so it looks a little nicer, center it in the middle of my screen a little bit more so that it's not as ugly as sin, right? And let's take a look at how it's still ugly, but not as bad. Let's take a look. Well, that's the idea. The idea is make it as nice as possible when we're doing this stuff, right? And does it work? Ta-da. A little nicer. And now you can see that you get a bit of hover effects here. You get the names, you get the date. This is kind of wrong too. One more thing before we stop. The date is messed up, right? I don't like this. This is no good. This is not right, right? How do we change that? Well, one last thing, and I'll put it up on GitHub, and I swear I'll let you guys go so I can go home and have some dinner. I want to go down here as well. I know you guys are laughing. If I go to here, I want to split this one. I'm going to say something like this. The last one is a data. It's a little bit different than the others because this is an enrollment date. The other ones are just strict data, right? So I can do something like this. I can say data format string is equal to, and inside there I can format it so it looks like month, 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 day, day, and then year, 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 and then close it off, and that will give me my format string for what it's going to look like in my table. So save that. I'll let you look at that for a second. See what I've done. So I have data. So again, I'm manually data binding, all right, as opposed to drag and drop and making it work with the old web forms way. Now, here's the thing that I'll tell you. Notice that there on the bottom, there's a design view, right? Don't be fooled by the design view, okay? It's wrong, okay? I'm just letting you know, right? If you try and click on the design view, you can see it, and it looks like this. Is that what my page is going to look like? No, it can't look like this. Look, it's taking up the whole space. That's why we don't use design view anymore in the most modern web forms applications. We cannot. It's not, that's where we depart from Windows Forms. Windows Forms, that's different. We get what you see is kind of what you get, right? Web Forms, if anybody tells you anything different, that you drag and drop and create your stuff, they'll all look crappy. Go to the other classes. I want to challenge you guys. Go to your partners in the other classes and the other sections. I want to see what their data grid view is going to look like. It won't look like ours. Ours will look real, right? Let's go back. I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, by the way, but let's just take a look and see what happens. All right, so if you look at this thing, and if you run this, you're going to see that you're going to get the following, okay? So it's going to change the date, so it's looking like this, a little bit better, September, because they're all September 1st enrollments, right? But instead of putting that whole date in there, I've just changed it so it looks like this. A little bit nicer. It's not perfect by any means. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to make a little button. When I click my button, I'm going to do the update. I'm going to create a new page that's student details. That's what I'm going to do. And the student details page is going to allow me to update and delete, right? And maybe even create a new student. So all the other pieces of the operation here in one blow. I'll see if I can get that done next week for you guys. Now, there's going to be a lab next week. I'm going to warn you. We've already done students. I'm going to get you to do departments and courses as a lab on your own, right? To try it out, and so you can learn how bad this is. Like, you know, how tough it is to do. It's not tough at all, right? It's going to copy paste my code and you're going to make it go, right? But there's some finicky parts to it, and we got to figure out how to. There's going to be some errors that are going to come up, right? And we're going to fix this up. Okay, that's the first part of data. Data part 1. Are you guys okay with this? I know people from home are probably watching and going, "Oh my God, what has he done? What has he done?" Right? Don't be afraid. All right, we're gonna go through this journey together. All right. Some parts are going to be fun. Other parts, not so fun. But you're still going to be able to get through this because this is the old technology we need to get through, web forms, before we go to the second half of the semester when we do more modern technology using MVC. MVC, if you guys know MVC, there's a much higher chance of getting a job, right? Because most modern, places that are just developing websites are starting to move away from web forms into MVC. But you need to know both. And that's why I've designed this course, our section, like this, right? In which we depart a little bit from the other sections that exist here at the school, right? When it comes to COMP229, because we need to kind of modernize what we do, right? So I'm pushing you into database early. If you look at I'm just putting it out there, right? If you look at the outline, we're not supposed to do database until like week 13, right? But we need to do it now. Yeah, it's way late. It's week 12 or something crazy. And if I'll show you the outline just really quickly so you guys are aware. So I'm sharing the changes with you so you're aware, okay? So you're not mad at me. I'm not trying to make you mad. I'm just saying that, we need to kind of talk about this because these are the changes I'm making to my section so you guys are aware, right? So no one's afraid of what's happening, right? So no one's like, oh my God, what is Tom doing? Notice that we're supposed to be, week 4, we're supposed to be chapter 5. We did chapter 5 last week, right? Chapter 4 and chapter 5 was covered, because we did chapter 1, chapter 2 and 3, 4 and 5 last week. Okay, let's look and see where we see data. Managing data sources in week 6, where they use ADO.NET. Okay, do you see Entity Framework anywhere? No. They start talking about week 8, databases with web applications, right? We're at week 4 right now. And if you keep going down, and then displaying data on data list control, we kind of did a grid view just now. That's week 9, right? And then keep going down. Security, we're going to handle way early. Link, we're doing link already, week 11, right? I'm saying, see it. And then they finally touch upon model view controller, and where is Entity Framework in here? Nowhere is the answer, right? So I'm hitting basically topics from the second half of the semester now, because the same topics we're learning now are going to be repeated in MVC, right? When we hit MVC, you're going to repeat them in more detail because we're going to build out an e-commerce website where you're going to sell your fantasy stuff, whatever you want to sell, okay? Any other questions before us? We are making changes to this, okay? Please don't be afraid. I'm going to guide you through the whole process, the whole step of the way, and I'm going to be producing some slides to help you with link and everything else next week, Entity Framework. This week was just a demo to get us connected to everything and to talk about things like Azure, challenges connecting to Azure, and introduce assignment or project number 1. Guys, thank you so much.